Hi, this week we are studying ethics, which is the study of right and wrong, and it's a branch of axiology which encompasses any study of values. Okay, and I think that everyone in this class is came into this class a philosopher already, and probably where you spent a lot of time philosophizing is in ethics, thinking about what's right and wrong, and trying to understand why those actions or certain actions are right or wrong. I'll start by saying that we have studied ethics already with Aristotle. We studied a kind of ethics called virtue ethics, and it studies one's character. So, virtue ethics is concerned with what kind of character traits help someone lead a good life and be considered a good person and to thrive. Okay, so Aristotle wasn't concerned with um, identifying duties, or rules that we ought to abide by, like, one should never steal or one should never lie. Aristotle was more concerned with what makes a person admirable in society. It's not a rule based or duty based moral philosophy. It's a character based moral philosophy. So this week we're turning our attention to duties and what rules we ought to abide by. So we'll be really focused on two theories in ethics: utilitarianism and deontology, both of which are types of duty ethics. So it's not so much about character and virtue as it is about trying to figure out what moral principles we ought to always abide by. And I want to start by saying, generally about ethics, there some people are what are called moral relativists. Okay, so and moral relativists hold that there are no moral facts. Okay, so I mean, gravity, the weight of gravity, is a fact, and you're either right or wrong about it. And that's why you're right or wrong on a science test. Whether you're right or wrong depends on how your belief aligns with the fact of gravity and what we know about it. Um, Moral relativists argue that morality doesn't work that way, that there is no moral fact that is objective, that holds people accountable and makes our personal moral beliefs right or wrong. And there's two kinds of moral relativists. One is the moral subjectivist. Okay? And that maintains that whatever the individual believes is right or wrong is right or wrong for that individual. And one individual is no more right about their moral beliefs than another. So if I believe that lying is okay to do, and you believe that lying is always wrong, then the moral subjectivist would say there's no fact of the matter. There's no objective moral fact that makes my opinion wrong and your opinion right, or vice versa. We just differ in our moral beliefs, and we're both equally entitled to our moral beliefs. So morality ultimately comes down to the subject, to you or I and our varying beliefs. And you could try to convince me of your belief, but you're not trying to convince me of a fact. You're just trying to persuade me to take over your belief, okay? Now, another kind of relativism is cultural moral relativism. And this takes relativism back a step. Okay, so it's not competing individuals, but different cultures have different beliefs, and whether you are right or wrong about your moral belief is relative to your culture. So if in the U.S. We think that lying is always wrong, but I, a U.S. citizen, think that lying is right, that makes me wrong. But not because my belief doesn't adhere to a moral fact, it's because my belief doesn't adhere to my culture's general agreement that lying is wrong. Again, there's no fact to the matter that makes my culture right over someone else's culture. So I think a good example here of the cultural moral relativist is in the U.S. we condemn female genital mutilation. Okay, we think it's a moral outrage and it's illegal, and we condemn it outright and think that it's immoral. But there are countries, such as Somalia, where female genital mutilation is still practiced. And sure, there are people within those countries who protest it and resist it, but it's still condoned, at least by the people with the most political power, power to set laws and so on. So the cultural moral relativists would say there is no fact of the matter. Female genital mutilation isn't objectively right or wrong. It's wrong in the U.S. If you come to the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. Your moral beliefs on that matter are relative to the U.S. And then it's right in other parts of the world. And so instead of being grounded in the subject and just having differing opinions, we have differing opinions between different cultural groups. But still, no fact of the matter, no moral facts. And that makes both of these positions moral relativist positions. So moral relativism makes many people uneasy because we want to say that certain acts are objectively wrong. They've always been wrong. They're wrong right now, and they always will be wrong. So moral relativism is a hard theory to defend because you have to ultimately say that there are no moral facts. So we have, in contrast to moral relativism, moral realism. And as you might imagine, this is the theory that there are moral facts. There's a fact to the matter on the issue of female genital mutilation, and I'm wrong or right in relation to that fact, and my cultural group is right or wrong in relation to that fact. What we are studying this week are two moral realist positions. And the challenge for the moral realist is to determine what moral principles, what are the moral principles? What are the moral facts? What is it that makes an act right or wrong? Okay, and what are our moral duties? Whether or not you believe them to be, what are they in reality? Okay. So I want to look at a typical moral argument. What will all moral arguments have in common? Well, they'll be made up of number one, statements that have nothing to do with philosophy. They're verifiable statements. They're true or they're false. But they describe what's happening, what is the case that we are analyzing. Okay? And then you'll have what's called a basic moral principle. And that is essentially a duty in the case of duty ethics, which we're studying, which is about a kind of act or non-act. To not act is itself an action. If I see that someone's stealing from someone else and I don't act, that has moral, that's morally questionable. Because that is itself a choice and itself a kind of action, to refrain from acting. So basic moral principles are about a kind of act or omission. Okay, and then lastly, we get a singular moral judgment. We want to be able to judge actions right or wrong. So we need, to be able to make a singular moral judgment, a judgment about a certain case. So let's. This will become pretty clear when we consider an example. Okay. Let's consider a rather horrific event, but one that is still on people's minds, and that's the mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas. Okay. So what we have are, in any argument, a series of premises inferring a conclusion. So we have premise one: Stephen Paddock fired a gun on a crowd. Okay. That is a statement, and it's true or false, and it happens to be true. Premise two: 58 people were killed. And premise three: 851 people were injured. Okay. So now we've described what happened. Okay. So then we get, now we want to condemn Stephen Paddock's act. It seems to be an immoral act, but we need to have a reason for it. So we need a basic moral principle included in our argument that tells us why what he did was wrong. So when you're forming an argument, it can be kind of helpful to get the conclusion, that you are going for, that you think is, the correct conclusion here. So the conclusion would be Stephen Paddock acted immorally. But what we need is a reason then. We need our fourth premise. Okay? What makes that act wrong? What we have so far is a statement for premise one, a statement for premise two, a statement for premise three. Doesn't involve philosophy, but is a true or false claim about what happened. The conclusion is a particular moral judgment about this case. So that would be a singular moral judgment. Okay? So what we need here is a basic moral judgment. Okay? What makes this act wrong? So one candidate is, firing a gun into a crowd is always wrong, or the killing of innocent people is always wrong. Those judgments are basic because they don't just have to do with Las Vegas, they have to do with any kind of act. That kind of act is the kind of act that is wrong. We are going to be looking at utilitarianism and deontology this week, so I actually want to present a utilitarian basic moral judgment, which is that an act that increases suffering is wrong. Okay? So that is a claim about a kind of act. It has as much to do with Las Vegas as it would have to do with me lying to someone. If I lie to someone and it causes distrust and it causes someone to be hurt unnecessarily, then I've acted in a way that causes more suffering in the world, which makes my lie wrong. In the same way that firing a gun and killing and injuring people causes increased suffering in the world, makes that act wrong. So this basic moral judgment is about a kind of act. And it applies to anything that you do. If you go out in the world, you can assess any of your actions and question whether it increases suffering in the world. If it does, and this is true, this is real. This is a real statement about the nature of morality. Then you can make a singular moral judgment about your action. Okay? So clearly, the challenge for philosophers is in determining what these basic moral judgments are and defending them, explaining why this gets at the nature of morality, because there's, of course, different opinions and arguments to be made about what morality entails.